Early in the morning, Arthur's peace was disturbed by a sudden attack, not from danger, but from Tessia. She had leapt onto him while he was sleeping, squeezing his legs and refusing to let go until he admitted defeat. Arthur groaned, rubbing his leg to bring back the feeling. He was clearly annoyed by the method she chose to wake him. Tessia, on the other hand, responded with playful confidence. She reminded him that it was getting harder to wake him each morning and joked that he should feel lucky to be woken by a pretty girl every day. She even fluttered her eyes at him teasingly. Arthur mumbled under his breath, saying he found the maids around the house to be pretty enough already. Unfortunately, Tessia heard him. She quickly pinched his side, clearly unimpressed by his response. Arthur couldn't help but reflect on how much Tessia had changed. He remembered the timid girl who used to be afraid of sleeping alone in the tent, the one who cried and begged him not to leave. That sweet version of her had vanished, replaced by someone far more confident and bold. Deep down, Arthur missed the old Tessia. As they both walked down the stairs of the house, Tessia turned to Arthur with a question that clearly came from jealousy. She wanted to know if he truly thought the maid from earlier was pretty. Arthur was clearly tired of the teasing and dismissed her question with frustration. Before the exchange could continue, Varian was already waiting for them. He scolded them lightly for taking so long and reminded them it was time to get ready for their lesson. Their studies that day focused on the magical structure of the world. Arthur began to explain that there were 4 basic elements: water, wind, earth, and fire. However, when a mage achieved mastery over their elemental affinity, they could sometimes awaken a higher form of that element. These higher elements included ice, gravity, lightning, and sound. Mages who could manipulate these advanced elements were known as deviants. He went on to explain how the 3 main races, dwarves, elves, and humans, each had different affinities and limits. Dwarves, for example, could only control earth and fire, but what they lacked in range, they made up for in strength. Their deep connection to these 2 elements made them extremely powerful. All dwarves were naturally talented in working with metal, and those who reached higher skill could even manipulate magma by combining their earth and fire magic to an intense degree. Elves were different. They were born with strong affinities to water, wind, and earth. However, they were unable to use the higher forms of those elements. In rare cases, an elf could be born with a special type of magic that allowed them to control plants. This too was considered a kind of deviant ability, but it was unique to their race. Humans were the most flexible. Unlike dwarves and elves, human mages could be born with any of the 4 basic elemental affinities. More importantly, humans were the only race that had the potential to become deviants in all 4 elements. Additionally, humans could sometimes awaken abilities that didn't fall under any element at all. These rare individuals were called anomalies. For example, a healer, also known as an emitter, was considered an anomaly due to their unique power. As the intense training session continued, Arthur broke the silence with a question. He wanted to know if his explanation earlier had been good enough. Varian paused for a moment, thinking carefully. After a bit of consideration, he gave a casual nod, saying it was acceptable, though not perfect. Meanwhile, Tessia was panting from the physical strain. Sweat ran down her face as she raised her hand, signaling she had a question. She asked about Arthur's training process, pointing out that the current method, called assimilation, was meant to prepare his body to withstand a beast will, but she wondered if it wouldn't be better for him to train his body physically while using magic, just as she had been doing. Arthur, although calm on the outside, reflected silently to himself. From the very beginning, he had understood the differences between the races, but over the past 3 years, those differences had become even more clear. Among humans, awakening at a late preteen age was seen as impressive, but for elves, it wasn't rare to awaken as early as 10 years old. Tessia herself had awakened even sooner, at just 9. It reminded Arthur of how remarkable she truly was. Varian turned to Tessia with a grin and asked if she was perhaps feeling frustrated because she was the only one getting beat up during training. Tessia didn't hide it. She admitted that she was indeed annoyed by it. Arthur again thought to himself, since that time, Tessia had been training hard with a tutor to improve her conjuring skills, while also learning to fight under her grandfather's guidance. Watching her grow stronger every day, Arthur believed she would become a true monster in battle someday. Still, he admitted inwardly that he was in no position to talk, given his own progress. Varian explained Tessia's question in more detail. What Arthur had been doing for the past 3 years wasn't traditional physical training. Instead, it was something far more complex. He had been slowly merging his bones, muscles, and internal organs with mana. Though it didn't look like physical training, this internal development would make Arthur's body far stronger and tougher than that of a seasoned warrior once the process was complete. Tessia, hearing this, seemed impressed, but only for a moment. Then, with a teasing smirk, she questioned why Arthur still seemed so sensitive when she hit him if his body was becoming so strong. Varian laughed heartily at her comment. Arthur, though slightly embarrassed, spoke up in defense of his pride. He reminded them that even if his body was changing, he could still feel pain. He wasn't invincible yet. Varian, amused, noted that despite 3 years of deep assimilation, assimilation training, Arthur still had enough energy to argue back. Then, with a serious tone, he asked Arthur if he was ready to continue. Arthur didn't hesitate. With a firm nod and determination in his eyes, he made it clear that he was ready for what was to come. Varian gave a proud look as he told Arthur that after this day, he would become a true beast tamer, far more than the adventurers who only used their beast wills like tools. To begin the final step, Varian explained that he would ignite Arthur's mana core by pushing a large amount of his own mana into it. He warned that Arthur might feel warm, but it shouldn't be too bad. Then Varian began the process. He released his powerful mana, channeling it deep into Arthur's core, mixing it with Arthur's own mana. At first, Arthur felt a warm sensation spreading through his body, like hot wind rushing in and out of his pores. But the warmth soon turned into something else, something unbearable. A burning pain exploded from within his body. It felt like his very bones were trying to break free from under his skin. The pain was too much. A loud scream escaped Arthur's mouth, the kind that no one could hold back. His body was reaching its breaking point. Then suddenly, everything shifted. A loud explosion roared around them, powerful enough to shake the entire training ground. The devastating impact sent both Varian and Tessia flying out of the area. For a moment, the world seemed to pause as both of them slowly got up, dazed and stunned from what had just happened. Arthur's vision started to fade, but he didn't fight it. The darkness was a relief. It meant the pain was finally over. After the blast settled and the storm of energy disappeared, Tessia and Varian rushed over to where Arthur's unconscious body lay. Tessia called out to him in panic, asking if he was okay. Arthur, barely conscious, whispered back that he thought he was fine. Varian, kneeling beside him, looked serious. He admitted that he had respected Arthur's decision not to reveal everything until now, but he had to ask, what kind of beast had given its will to Arthur? With slow breaths, Arthur gave his answer. The beast was a dragon. At that moment, Varian's eyes widened in complete disbelief. He was stunned. The realization left him speechless. Sometime later, Arthur woke up in his bed. The room was quiet. Varian was sitting nearby, watching over him. As Arthur opened his eyes, Varian gently asked how he was feeling, but Arthur, still remembering the explosion, turned the question back to him, reminding him of how wild he had gone just before Arthur passed out. Varian gave an awkward cough and admitted that he had calmed down since then. Arthur nodded, then brought up something important. He asked if he could trust Varian and Tessia to keep his secret even after he left them. Varian reassured him without hesitation, and then with a more serious expression, he informed Arthur of the next step. The date for Arthur's departure had been decided. He would be leaving in 4 months. Arthur's eyes lit up with excitement. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. For the longest time, he thought his departure was still 2 years away, but now he was being told otherwise. Varian explained that the reason for this sudden change was because an interracial tournament between the 3 major kingdoms had finally been confirmed. This event, which had been in planning for some time, was now official. During this tournament, the portals in Zyral's city of the Kingdom of Sapin would be open to both Eleanor and the Kingdom of Darv. It was a rare chance for young talents from the different kingdoms to gather and compete. Arthur quickly guessed the real reason Tessia wasn't around during this conversation. He suspected Varian had kept her away to break the news to him privately. Varian, seeing through Arthur's thoughts, reassured him not to worry. He acknowledged that Arthur had been watching over his family from afar through Rhynia all these years, but now he would finally be able to see them in person. The time was drawing close. Even though Arthur was excited, the weight of it all still settled on him. 4 months felt like such a short time, but Varian wasn't done. With a slight grin, he rubbed Arthur's head playfully and promised that he would make Arthur wish those 4 months passed even faster. Now that Arthur had completed his assimilation, his training would become much harder. With those words, Varian stood up and made his way to leave the room. He said he would be the one to break the news to Tessia gently. Left alone in the room, Arthur whispered to himself. 4 months. The thought echoed in his mind. As silence returned, Arthur's attention was pulled by a faint rustling sound. At first, he assumed it was just the wind, but then his eyes landed on something unusual. Sylvia's stone, the rainbow-colored gem she had once given him, was beginning to crack. Arthur broke into a nervous sweat. He panicked, wondering if the stone had somehow broken. He leapt out of bed, heart racing, and carefully searched through his belongings to find the gem. His breath caught when he finally saw it up close. The surface was splitting open, but what shocked him the most was the truth behind it. This wasn't just a stone, it wasn't a gem at all. It was an egg. As the crack spread, a small creature finally pushed its way out of the shell. Arthur stood still, staring at the newborn in complete disbelief. The creature had delicate wings, soft scales, and bright, curious eyes. The first thought that struck him was that it looked like a dragon. Arthur gently lifted the little creature in his hands. Its small body was warm, and its eyes sparkled with life. A soft sound came from it, like a cheerful greeting. It was an affectionate chirp. Arthur smiled wide. This little being, born from Sylvia's gift, was far more than anything he had imagined. He stroked the dragon gently, overwhelmed by how adorable it was. In that moment, his heart softened. As Arthur held the tiny creature in his hands, admiring how cute and precious it was, something unexpected happened. The creature suddenly bit his hand. A sharp pain shot through him, making him instinctively try to pull his arm away. He was startled, not just by the bite, but by something even more surprising. A soft voice echoed in his mind. It called out a word, one that made his heart skip a beat. It sounded like the creature had just said mama. Arthur blinked, unsure if he had imagined it, but then he heard it again. The creature was speaking to him through telepathy. Confused but amused, Arthur responded out loud, gently correcting the creature. He explained that while he might be her caretaker, he was actually a boy, so she should call him Papa instead. In response, the little dragon jumped up with joy, accepting the word instantly. Arthur smiled at her enthusiasm and decided on a name. He wanted to honor Sylvia, the one who had gifted him the egg, so he named the dragon Sylvie. To his surprise, he felt a pulse of happiness through their connection. Sylvie truly liked the name. Arthur could actually feel her emotions through the bond they shared. Looking down at his hand, he noticed something else. There was a faint mark on his skin, one that had appeared since the moment Sylvie had hatched. It wasn't just a bite mark, it was something deeper. It was forming a connection between him and Sylvie. He chuckled quietly at the thought. He was only 8 years old, and yet he already had a magical tattoo, and somehow he had also become a father. Petting Sylvie's small horned head, Arthur finally relaxed. He felt comfort in the creature's warmth and slowly drifted off to sleep, his new companion resting beside him. But the peace didn't last long. A high-pitched scream suddenly echoed through the room, jolting Arthur out of his sleep. He jumped up in panic, looking around in confusion. The scream wasn't from danger. It was from someone who had just entered the room. It was Tessia. She had come in and discovered Sylvie, now squirming in her arms. Tessia was completely taken over by Sylvie's cuteness and couldn't stop herself from holding her tightly. Arthur sighed and decided it wasn't anything serious. He laid back down and drifted off again. The next day, Arthur and Tessia followed their usual morning routine. As they walked together, Tessia couldn't stop talking about Sylvie. She was amazed by Arthur's ability to communicate with the little dragon through thoughts. She admitted that she wished she had the same connection, thinking that maybe Sylvie would like her more if she could talk with her mind too. Arthur, however, pointed out that Sylvie might be more comfortable if Tessia didn't always stare at her like she was about to snatch her up. Arthur and Tessia returned to their usual training ground, walking side by side under the soft light of morning. As they reached the clearing, they saw someone waiting for them. It was Varian. Varian's eyes widened the moment he saw the little creature. He stared directly at the top of Arthur's head, where Sylvie was perched. He was shocked. Words stumbled out of his mouth, and for a while, he couldn't even form a complete sentence. He joked that he might die early if surprises like this kept coming. Once Arthur explained everything, how Sylvie had hatched from the gem given to him by Sylvia, and how she had chosen him as her bond, Varian's expression turned serious. After listening carefully, Varian told them that beings like Sylvie normally only hatch in the presence of their own kind. It was strange that she had hatched in front of Arthur. They thought deeply about why that might have happened, and the only possible answer was that Arthur had activated Sylvia's will the day before. Arthur asked Varian if he would need to hide Sylvie when he eventually returned home. After all, most people wouldn't know that Sylvie was actually a powerful ancient being. Varian said it was possible to pass her off as a rare mana beast, which would keep suspicion away. But then Varian shifted the topic. He reminded Arthur that they had delayed training his mana core while he was assimilating Sylvia's will. Now that Arthur was fully awakened, it was time to begin serious training, both for his mana core and his newly acquired dragon will. Arthur asked what he needed to do. Varian smiled with a knowing look. He explained that the best way to access the first stage of Arthur's beast will and also strengthen his mana core was through constant combat. Arthur understood. Fighting made sense. And then Varian added something more. Arthur would be fighting another beast tamer, someone who had already mastered the stages Arthur had yet to learn. Before Arthur could respond, Varian activated his own beast tamer ability. The ground rumbled violently as a deafening roar filled the air. Arthur braced himself, feeling the power erupt all around him. Right in front of his eyes, Varian began to transform. His body shifted. His presence became darker and more dangerous. As the transformation completed, Varian looked Arthur directly in the eyes. It was clear. This was not just training anymore. It was a fight. Arthur now stood face to face with a true beast tamer. Beast tamers were a rare kind of mage. They could inherit and harness the abilities of mana beasts. The first level of power, called the acquire phase, allowed them to borrow their beast strength, but true mastery came in the second stage, the integrate phase. At this level, the tamer didn't just use power, they became one with their beast nature. Varian was one of the few who had reached that second stage. After decades of study and discipline, adrenaline, he had unlocked the full potential of his beast will. He could now fight using the deadly speed, stealth, and power of a Shadow Panther. Varian stood calmly before Arthur and instructed him to pay attention, warning that he would now try to sneak up from behind. Arthur was confused for a moment. He wondered if Varian really meant to sneak up on him, even after announcing it so clearly. Still, Arthur didn't take the words lightly. He sharpened his focus, locking his eyes on Varian and preparing to predict his next move. But in the blink of an eye, Varian disappeared. Before Arthur could react, he felt a light tap on his shoulder. He turned quickly, hoping to tag Varian in return, but the elf elder was already gone again. Another tap came from the opposite side, and once again, Varian had vanished before Arthur could move. The speed and silence of his movements were beyond anything Arthur had ever seen. He gulped in surprise, realizing just how much of a gap there still was between them. Despite being overwhelmed, Arthur let out a small smile and raised his hand in surrender. At his current level, he couldn't even react to Varian's speed, and that beastly form, shrouded in darkness and silence, was terrifying. It left a strong impression on him. Varian smirked knowingly. He explained that the integrated form wasn't perfect. It took a toll on his stamina, even for him. Arthur admitted that what impressed him the most wasn't just the movement speed, but the fact that he couldn't sense Varian's presence at all, not even when he was right behind him. Varian then explained the reason behind this. The Shadow Panther, the beast from which his will originated, naturally manipulated wind and sound. That was how it achieved complete silence and invisibility during movement. After showing the strength of the second stage, Varian finally handed Arthur a wooden sword. The real training was about to begin. From that moment, days began to fly by. Arthur trained constantly, fully immersing himself in Varian's teachings. He learned how to strengthen his mana core, push his body to its limits, and understand the nature of the dragon will. Under Varian's guidance and with his own efforts, Arthur finally managed to reach the first stage of his beast will. This stage allowed him to draw power from within, Sylvia's will now flowing through his veins. Varian also taught him how to mask the presence of his beast will. This was important because most mages would recognize such a presence, and it was better to keep it hidden. Arthur worked hard, dividing his days between physical training, mana control, and deep meditation on the dragon will. Fortunately, because his body had already undergone assimilation, it could handle the intense training without breaking down. His strength, stamina, and resilience improved rapidly. When he wasn't training, Arthur spent his free time doing something even more important: being a child. He remembered Sylvia's last wish and tried to enjoy the simple, joyful moments of childhood. Whether it was playing around the forest or spending time with Tessia, he found peace in those moments. He laughed, smiled, and let his young heart be light, even if just for a little while. But eventually the day came, the day he had to leave. Tessia stood before him, her eyes filled with tears. The sadness on her face said more than words ever could. After spending every day together for the past few years, it was painful to accept that Arthur was leaving. The bond between them had grown strong, and saying goodbye was not easy for her. Arthur quietly made sure Sylvie's mark was hidden. He wore the feather Sylvia had left behind, and it worked well in hiding any traces of Sylvie's true nature. Then he felt a tap on his shoulder. Varian stood beside him, calm but firm. It was time to go. The carriage was ready and waiting at the edge of the forest. Varian handed Arthur a small token, a beautifully crafted badge adorned with the Aerolith House crest. It would help him navigate through the forest and beyond, keeping him safe and guided on his journey. Arthur took it with a respectful nod. Varian leaned down beside Arthur and whispered something in a playful tone. He hinted that if Arthur ever got lost, he could always find another princess to lead him back home. Tessia, who clearly heard the words, didn't hold back. With a swift motion, she tugged on Varian's beard in frustration. Varian winced and stumbled back, clearly surprised by the sudden attack. He laughed it off, insisting that it had only been a joke and meant no harm. Arthur then turned to Tessia with a sincere look. He told her that with Varian teaching her, he expected her to grow stronger than even him by the next time they met. Tessia nodded quietly, still looking sad. Arthur leaned in and gave her a gentle hug. He told her how much he would miss her and reminded her to stay safe. Tessia couldn't hold back anymore. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she cried, saying how much she would miss him too. Arthur finally pulled back, gave one last look to both Tessia and Varian, and then turned toward the carriage that awaited him at the edge of the forest. He waved his final farewell and stepped inside. As Arthur settled in, he was surprised to see a few familiar faces inside the carriage. One of them, a boy with an arrogant expression, recognized Arthur immediately. He loudly mocked Arthur, calling him a human brat and joking about whether he had been kicked out of the kingdom. Arthur stared at him, confused. He couldn't recall the boy's name or face. That only made the boy angrier. The elf boy stood up proudly and declared himself as the noble who had once been unfairly defeated in a duel. He reminded Arthur that a real duel was supposed to be a display of magic, where the challenger struck first, and that Arthur had ignored that tradition. As the other passengers chuckled startled, recognition finally clicked in Arthur's mind. He remembered the event, and with a smirk, he casually responded using the wrong name on purpose. This only enraged the boy even more. The elf introduced himself again, Faerith Evsar III, heir of the noble Ivsar family. He tried to reclaim some dignity by saying that back then, he was just a naive child, but now things would be different if they fought again. Arthur extended his hand calmly and greeted him, apologizing for what happened before. The tension broke when one of the girls in the carriage giggled and mentioned that everyone simply called him Feifei. This made the noble boy explode in frustration as the rest of the group laughed. Time passed as the carriage traveled along its path. The energy shifted as the trees of the forest gave way to the boundaries of civilization. Eventually, someone announced their arrival. Arthur peered out the window, excitement blooming in his chest. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. They had reached their destination, the floating city of Xyrus, the place where his mother and father were waiting for him. As the carriage approached the magical gate, Arthur felt the familiar sensation once again. The world around him stretched and warped. A strange pull tugged at everything, his body, his senses, and even time itself, until it all faded into the shimmering magic of teleportation. And just like that, he stepped into the next chapter of his journey. Jumping down from the carriage, Arthur took his first step back into the city with Sylvie still perched on top of his head. The floating city of Xyrus buzzed with life, but Arthur's heart was focused on just one thing, finding home. He moved through narrow alleyways, his mind working hard to remember the home where his parents now lived. For nearly an hour, he wandered through unfamiliar streets, past shops and stone roads, asking himself if he had taken a wrong turn. But finally, standing before him was a large manor, the home, the place his parents were supposed to be staying. With a shaky breath, Arthur whispered to Sylvie that they were finally home, but the weight of this moment was more than he had expected. He had fought battles, faced death, lost someone important, and survived on pure instinct. Yet none of those things made his heart race the way this simple moment did, standing in front of the door of his family's home, unsure of what would happen next. Arthur raised his hand and knocked. It felt strange. He wasn't sure if he would be recognized. The pain, the training, the loneliness, none of it could prepare him for the fear that maybe, just maybe, things had changed too much. Then, from inside, he heard small footsteps. A soft voice called out. A maid opened the door, and beside her stood a little girl. As soon as the girl saw Arthur, she immediately hid behind the maid, shy and curious. The maid herself seemed surprised. Seeing a young boy knocking at the door of a noble family's estate wasn't something normal. Arthur straightened himself, trying to look composed, even as Sylvie rocked slightly on his head. He introduced himself politely, giving his name and explaining that he believed his family was staying here. But before the maid could even answer, another voice came from inside, a woman's voice, rushing, familiar, warm. The woman appeared, scolding the little girl for always running to the front door. She held a small bowl in her hands, probably food for the child, but when her eyes fell on Arthur, she froze. The bowl slipped from her hands. Arthur looked at her, then at the little girl who was now clearly his sister. His vision blurred with tears. All he could manage to say was that he was home. He gave a small, awkward wave, uncertain if she would truly recognize him, but all his fear disappeared in a heartbeat. The woman, Alice, his mother, rushed forward. She ran faster than he had ever seen her move, collapsing to her knees before him and pulling him tightly into her arms. Her voice trembled as she held him with every bit of strength she had, crying and laughing at the same time, repeating that he was truly home now. She clung to him like she would never let go again. Little Eleanor, his sister, looked at her mother and started crying too. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she knew enough to feel the emotion in the air. Then came the heavy sound of footsteps. It was Reynolds, and for a moment, no words were needed. He pulled Arthur into his arms, joining the embrace already shared by Alice and Eleanor. It was a reunion of the Leywin family, pain, love, and relief pouring out as their arms wrapped around each other. The tears flowed freely. Arthur had made it back. He was no longer alone. Even the maid standing by the door, who had only just met this boy, found herself crying too. Eventually, the emotions calmed, and the Leywin family managed to settle down inside the warm manor. Alice, who had finally stopped crying, couldn't help but start fussing over her son. Her voice was filled with concern as she asked about his health. She remembered the strange voice that had spoken to them when Arthur had gone missing, and how it had mentioned an illness. She wanted to know if it had been fully treated. She also couldn't ignore how thin he looked. Her motherly heart ached as she asked if he had been eating properly during all that time away. Arthur reassured her with a calm smile. He said he was fine, better than than ever, in fact. Reynolds chuckled, lightly teasing Alice for asking so many questions at once. He pointed out how their son had grown taller and stronger. Anyone could see the difference just by looking at him. Alice agreed, her eyes still glistening with tears, but now they held pride. She then called over Eleanor and encouraged her to greet her big brother. The little girl stared at Arthur with wide, uncertain eyes. She tilted her head slightly, trying to match the face in front of her with the stories she had heard. Alice reminded her that this was the same brother she and Reynolds had talked about at bedtime. Her big brother who had gone far away and would come back one day. Eleanor hesitated, then shyly stepped forward and greeted Arthur in a soft, trembling voice. Arthur leaned in gently, giving her a kind smile. He introduced himself to her properly and welcomed her as his little sister. It was the first time they had truly met. After the touching reunion, Arthur sat down with his family and began explaining everything that had happened since he fell from the cliff. Though he trusted them, he chose not to mention Sylvia, the dragon. Instead, he explained his survival as a lucky accident. His body had unconsciously used magic to protect itself during the fall. He told them about how he had been found and how he spent time recovering in the kingdom of Elenoir, with a girl named Tess who had helped him. Reynolds, noticing Sylvie on Arthur's lap, became curious. He asked about the small creature that hadn't left Arthur's side. Arthur looked at Sylvie and gently stroked her head as he told them the story. While traveling, he had entered a mana beast's den by accident. There he found Sylvie's mother, gravely injured and near death. Arthur had tried to help, but the mother had been too far gone. All he could do was care for the baby she had left behind. From that moment on, Sylvie had been with him. Alice listened quietly, still concerned about her son's health. She asked again if he was sure that the illness was completely gone, her voice full of worry. Arthur explained that there was no need to worry anymore. The illness had not been something normal. It had more to do with the instability of his mana core, which had been affected because he awakened his powers earlier than most. Deep down, Arthur felt a pang of guilt. He knew he hadn't told them everything. He wanted to, but until he became strong enough, it was too risky. But Reynolds immediately caught on to that and asked excitedly what stage Arthur's mana core had reached. Before Arthur could respond, Alice gave Reynolds an annoyed look. She was frustrated that her husband was already jumping into training talk just after their son had returned home. But Reynolds simply laughed, brushing off her frustration. He said there was nothing wrong with comparing progress between father and son. He shared that since they arrived in the city, he had been working as an instructor for the Helsty Auction House guards. It wasn't much, but it helped keep him active and allowed him to continue training while providing for the family. Arthur curiously asked what stage Reynolds' mana core had reached. With a proud chuckle, Reynolds stood a bit straighter, his chest puffed with pride. He shared that 2 years ago he had broken through and reached the dark orange stage. Arthur was genuinely impressed. He could see how his father had gotten physically stronger, but realizing that Reynolds had also advanced so far in his mana development left him quietly surprised. He knew how hard his father must have worked to achieve that. Arthur praised him sincerely, acknowledging his hard work. Reynolds beamed with a confident grin, clearly enjoying the moment, and then flipped the question, asking where Arthur himself stood now. Arthur hesitated for a moment before admitting that his mana core had reached the light red stage. Reynolds froze, staring at his son in disbelief. The shock was so strong that he stumbled, completely thrown off balance. He then grabbed Arthur by the shoulders, almost shaking him in excitement. He wanted to know when and how Arthur had advanced so far, but he quickly decided that there was no point in talking anymore. They were going to the backyard for a sparring session right now. Arthur couldn't help but laugh. His father was exactly the same as he remembered, full of energy, always competitive, and always excited about training. It felt good to be home. Just as the family stood up and was about to head to the backyard, the front door swung open. A man entered in a hurry, his voice filled with urgency and confusion. He had thin features, wore glasses, and looked like he had rushed over straight from work. Following closely behind him were a woman and a young girl. Arthur turned to look at them, observing quietly. Inwardly, he realized that these were the people who had taken care of his family while he had been gone. Reynolds stepped forward to greet them. He introduced the man as Vincent Helstia, the owner of the Helsty Auction House and a longtime friend of his. He also mentioned that Vincent was now his employer and that they had been living in his home. He encouraged Arthur to introduce himself before they accidentally ended up damaging anything. Vincent, still in disbelief at the reunion happening before him, was trying to take it all in. Arthur respectfully introduced himself to both Mr. and Mrs. Helstia. He admitted that this sudden return might have caused confusion, but explained that it was he who had requested requested his parents not to tell anyone. He apologized sincerely for the surprise. Vincent, still stunned, joked about how composed Arthur was, so unlike Reynolds. Reynolds playfully grumbled at that, admitting that people said that often, but confirmed that Arthur was definitely his son. Tabitha Helste smiled warmly and welcomed Arthur to their home. She then introduced her daughter, Lilia, who was the same age as Arthur. She expressed hope that the two of them would become friends. Arthur gave a gentle smile and waved politely at Lilia, while Sylvie gave a curious blink at the new faces. The little girl, Lilia, looked up at Arthur with wide, curious eyes. She pointed hesitantly at the small creature resting on his head. Arthur noticed her interest and gently explained that the creature was an infant mana beast named Sylvie, his bonded companion. Vincent, still adjusting to the surprises of the day, suddenly remembered something. His expression turned slightly anxious as he questioned the earlier comment about wrecking his house. Reynolds immediately perked up, remembering their earlier plan. He excitedly told Vincent that he and Arthur were just heading out to the backyard for a sparring session. Vincent's face shifted from confusion to disbelief. He repeated the word sparring in disbelief, but it quickly dawned on him that they were actually serious. Arthur and Reynolds had already stepped out and were stretching, warming up for their father-son match. Back inside, Vincent turned to Alice in disbelief. He questioned if Reynolds was actually serious about Arthur already being at the light red stage of mana cultivation. Tabitha gently pulled him down to sit, sensing that he needed a moment to process everything. Alice admitted that even she had been surprised, but she had no doubt. Arthur had always been gifted, and he had no reason to lie about his progress. Vincent struggled to believe it. In his mind, even the most gifted children accepted into Xyrus Academy, known for nurturing geniuses, were around 11 or 12 years old and had barely reached the dark red stage. Arthur, on the other hand, was just 8. Arthur, standing in the backyard, overheard the disbelief but didn't mind. Deep down, he knew that if he had been able to train continuously without needing to assimilate with Sylvia's beast will, he might have progressed even further. But that detail was best left unsaid. Reynolds cracked his knuckles and gave Arthur a determined look. He warned his son that he wasn't the same man Arthur remembered from before, but Arthur was just as eager. He too had changed, and he was ready to show it. With swift motion, Arthur charged forward. His body moved like a whisper in the wind, and within a blink, he had already reached Reynolds. Arthur threw a powerful punch aimed directly at his father, but Reynolds caught it with ease. His reflexes still sharp, but Arthur didn't stop. Twisting midair with agility, he used his momentum to land a flying kick against Reynolds' wrist. Then, taking advantage of the shift in balance, he struck again. He shifted his footing, grabbed the edge of Reynolds' robe, and used it to pull his father off balance, successfully tripping him to the ground. Arthur jumped back, regaining his stance with confidence. He stood straight, watching his father carefully with a slight smirk of satisfaction. Reynolds pushed himself up, laughing softly under his breath. He admitted to being caught off guard, but now it was time to get serious. Reynolds slammed his fists together, and instantly a burst of red-hot energy engulfed them. His fists became covered in scarlet flames, forming fiery gloves. The heat rippled through the air around him. His mastery over the fire element had reached the novice level after breaking through into the dark orange stage, and now he was about to use it. Reynolds warned Arthur to be ready, because what came next wouldn't be easy. In this world, the difference between conjurers and augmenters was clear. Conjurers had the natural ability to summon and control the element they were born with. For augmenters, however, their elemental affinity remained hidden until they reached a certain level. Only after crossing that threshold could they manifest their elements through their physical body. Reynolds had fought and trained since he was young, but without formal guidance, it took him until he reached the orange core stage to finally control fire. His explosive mana usage eventually turned into real flames, a rare achievement for someone without a structured path. But the world Arthur had come from was very different. There, no one was limited to a single element. Instead, it was a matter of choice, effort, and talent. People could work hard and reach new heights without being tied to one elemental path from birth. Arthur, who had been reborn into this new world with countless advantages, now stood at a moment where everything he had worked for began to show. His body, strengthened by the assimilation process, now moved in sync with mana like never before. He could feel his potential pushing forward. Arthur stepped forward toward his father, his tone confident, showing that he too had learned new tricks. His stance was firm, his eyes steady. Watching from the side, Vincent suddenly froze as he saw what Arthur was doing. He realized something that made his jaw drop. Arthur wasn't just gifted, he was a deviant, a rare being capable of wielding multiple elemental affinities. The shock hit everyone around. Without wasting time, Arthur dashed toward Reynolds like a flash of lightning. His speed was nearly invisible to the eye. Reynolds swung a powerful strike, but Arthur twisted at the last moment, evading the blow with precision. A wide grin formed on Reynolds' face, not out of frustration, but from the thrill of the fight. Reynolds tried again, stomping with force on the spot where Arthur had landed, but once again, Arthur narrowly escaped. Seizing that opening, Arthur aimed a heavy punch toward his father's face. Reynolds quickly shielded himself, blocking the strike just in time. Then came the clash. Both Arthur and Reynolds slammed their fists into each other. The impact exploded with a deafening sound like a sonic boom, shaking the ground beneath them. Reynolds didn't hesitate. He leapt into the air and came crashing down with a powerful drop attack. Arthur raised his arms and crossed them to defend himself, absorbing the brunt of the hit. The fight didn't slow. Blow after blow, the two exchanged strikes with intense speed and precision. Arthur's mind raced as fast as his body. He could tell that his father's punches were sharper now. Reynolds was using his longer reach to keep Arthur from getting too close. It was a smart tactic, but Arthur adapted quickly. As Reynolds swung again, Arthur dropped low and drove his knee into his father's calf, unbalancing him. At the same time, Arthur's fist shot upward and stopped just beneath Reynolds' chin. But Reynolds had also reacted. His own knee was now resting against Arthur's torso. They both froze at that moment. Neither had struck the final blow, but both had landed a clean counter. The tension in the air was thick. The bystanders, including Vincent, Alice, Tabitha, and Lilia, were stunned into silence. Then the silence broke. Reynolds suddenly laughed, filled with pride and joy. He wrapped his arms tightly around Arthur, pulling his son into a firm embrace. As Arthur stood still after the spar, a memory came to his mind. Those training days with Virion. Among the different deviant elements he had experimented with, lightning was the one he had progressed in the most. It responded to him more naturally than the others. Ice, on the other hand, was still unstable and hard to control. Sound and gravity, though part of the deviant spectrum, remained untouched, unlocked but unused. There was still a long journey ahead in mastering them. Yet despite that, Arthur smiled. It felt good to impress his parents, to show them what he had learned and how far he had come, even if there was more to do. Reynolds, still processing everything he had just witnessed, looked at Arthur with a mix of awe and curiosity. He wanted to know everything. When his son had learned to use lightning, how he managed it, and what else he could possibly do. Arthur admitted it hadn't been long since he began using it. He was honest. It was difficult to control, and beyond that, he hadn't explored much. Before the conversation could go further, Ellie came running with concern on her face. She rushed to Reynolds, worried if he was okay after the sparring match. Alice called out behind her, telling her to slow down and be careful. Vincent, still visibly shaken from what he had seen, muttered to himself. The talent Arthur had just shown clearly overwhelmed him. He silently thought about needing a drink to settle his nerves. Meanwhile, Tabitha looked at Arthur with wonder. In her eyes, he was no ordinary child. He was something truly rare. With the sparring session finished, everyone moved back into the house. They gathered around the dining table for dinner. The atmosphere was lively. Vincent, now slightly more composed, turned toward Reynolds. His voice was serious, his posture even more so. He asked Reynolds if he understood what kind of future Arthur had. Reynolds responded confidently. From the moment he learned Arthur had awakened at the age of 3, he had known his son was special. Tabitha's eyes widened in shock after hearing that. Awakening at such an early age was unheard of. Alice quietly confirmed it, remembering how Arthur had accidentally destroyed most of their house during the awakening process. That memory brought a laugh out of Arthur. He recalled the chaos of that day fondly. It had been messy, but unforgettable. The mood shifted when Vincent stood up from his seat. Placing both arms on the table, he looked at everyone seriously. He suggested something that surprised the room: enrolling Arthur in Xyrus Academy. It was the most prestigious magic school in the entire continent. Reynolds seemed uncertain. He pointed out that Arthur was only 8 years old, far younger than the average student at Xyrus. But Tabitha stepped in with a practical view. She admitted that her husband's suggestion had value. Arthur's talent was far beyond the average child's, and it would be worth supporting him. She even offered to sponsor his tuition, so Reynolds and Alice wouldn't have to carry that burden. Alice was touched but hesitant. She didn't feel comfortable letting them take on such a responsibility, especially after everything Vincent and Tabitha had already done for their family. She also doubted whether a child as young as Arthur would even be considered by such an esteemed institution. Vincent, however, insisted that he had connections. He frequently did business with the director of Xyrus Academy herself. He promised he could arrange something and speak to her directly. Before things went further, Arthur gently spoke up. Since the conversation involved his future, he wanted to give his opinion too. Everyone fell silent, giving him space to speak. After dinner ended, the house became quiet. In one of the nearby rooms, little Ellie had already fallen asleep. Reynolds and Alice took Arthur to the guest room that would be his during their stay. Alice looked at Arthur with a gentle smile. She was still amazed that her son was really here, back home, and no longer a little boy. He had grown into a strong and handsome young man, so different from the child she used to tuck in every night. Arthur softly acknowledged that he had changed a lot. His time away had shaped him into someone more mature, more capable, but Reynolds stepped in, reminding him that no matter how much he had changed on the outside, he was still their son. Even with the discovery discovery that Arthur was a deviant mage, someone capable of becoming one of the strongest mages in the future. Reynolds believed that was still only the second best thing that had happened that day. For him, having his son back was what truly mattered most. Alice agreed with her husband, though her tone turned a little sad. She wondered if her son had grown too old for a mother's affection. She joked about not being able to give him a goodnight kiss anymore, but Arthur walked up to her and kissed her on the cheek. It brought a warm smile to her face. In that small moment, she felt like nothing had changed between them. Arthur quietly wished both of his parents good night. He admitted that he had missed them deeply. Reynolds smiled and suggested they leave him to rest. He could see the tiredness in his son's eyes. Just as they were about to leave, Alice suddenly remembered something. She turned back excitedly and mentioned taking Arthur out shopping the next day. It would be a fun trip with Ellie, and a good chance for the two siblings to bond again. Arthur agreed, looking forward to spending more time with his family. Before stepping out, Reynolds added one last thing. He gently asked Arthur not to take Vincent's earlier behavior the wrong way. Vincent had been overly excited, but his intentions had been good. Arthur remembered that moment clearly. Back at the dinner table, when the discussion about Xyrus Academy had come up, everyone had been talking about what to do next with his future. While they meant well, Arthur had felt overwhelmed. He had just reunited with his family after so long, and the idea of leaving them again so soon felt too fast. He had politely asked to spend more time with them first before deciding anything about the academy. Vincent, who had been the most eager one at the table, quickly stepped back. He realized he had been pushing too hard and admitted that he was getting ahead of himself. Arthur had felt the tiredness settling into his body after the sparring earlier. He had quietly excused himself from the table and left to rest. As he stepped out of the dining area, Lilia Helstay caught sight of him. She watched him as he walked away, saying nothing. Arthur wandered through the grand halls of the Helstay estate, trying to find the room that had been prepared for him. But the house was large and full of twists and turns. So many hallways led to so many directions that he quickly found himself confused. Just then, a familiar voice called out to him. It was Lilia. She told him that the direction he was headed in would only take him to one of their cellars. She smiled and offered to take him somewhere better. Arthur followed her as she led him downstairs to a different part of the house, a cozy cellar where a group of maids and servants were having a small meal of their own. The place was warm, filled with laughter and the smell of home-cooked food. Lilia greeted the servants cheerfully, announcing Arthur's presence like he was just another friend joining them. One of the older ladies in the group jokingly pointed out that he was the same boy who had burned part of the lawn she worked so hard to keep green. Arthur gave a respectful apology for the trouble he had caused. Another servant chuckled and told Arthur not to worry. The old lady was only teasing him. Lilia joined the table like she belonged there, laughing and talking easily with the others. Arthur noticed how different she seemed. She had been quiet and reserved before, but now she looked happy and relaxed. This was clearly her comfort space, where she could be herself. She asked if there was any duck meat left, especially the fatty parts she liked. The old lady teased her again, warning that Madame Helstia had started noticing Lilia gaining weight. Lilia groaned and playfully scolded the woman, who turned out to be named Maria. The group burst into laughter. One of the maids leaned in closer to Arthur and whispered something only he could hear. She told him that Lilia often sneaked down here when she felt stressed. A kind man at the table added more. He shared that both the Helsty parents were not mages, but they wished deeply for their daughter to awaken as one. That hope had become a heavy burden for Lilia, even though she truly wanted to become a mage herself. The pressure of trying to meet her parents' dream weighed on her more than anyone let on. Arthur listened quietly, taking it all in. These people, though they seemed playful and light-hearted, carried their own quiet worries and struggles. As he looked at Lilia laughing with the servants, a small smile formed on his face. As Arthur finished recalling those moments, he assured his father that, judging from their actions and words, the Helsty family were kind-hearted people who truly meant well. Alice and Reynolds smiled at that. They said goodnight to their son, feeling grateful to have him back. The next morning, Arthur woke up to a familiar wet sensation on his face. His baby dragon, Sylvie, was licking him excitedly. She hopped up and down on him with joy, making it impossible for him to ignore her any longer. As he rubbed his sleepy eyes, Arthur found himself thinking about Tessia. He wondered how she was doing now. Dragging his energetic companion with him, Arthur stepped into the bathroom. Sylvie didn't like the warm water and cried in protest as it drenched her little body, but Arthur didn't stop. A proper wash was overdue, and soon enough, both of them were clean and refreshed. Just as he finished, there was a knock on his door. He quickly threw on his clothes, still struggling to pull his shirt over his head as he answered. Standing there was his little sister, Eleanor. She seemed shy, avoiding eye contact and rubbing her foot against the floor nervously. Arthur greeted her with a gentle smile, and Eleanor softly informed him that their mother had asked her to wake him up. Arthur knelt down, asking her to take him to see their mother. Her eyes lit up and she nodded with excitement. She grabbed his hand and pulled him along eagerly, her tiny steps full of joy. Sylvie trotted along behind them, him, curiously taking in the sights of her new surroundings. After having breakfast together, the family headed out to the marketplace. For Arthur, it was his first time seeing the famous Xyrus city up close. The main road was full of life and color. Buildings lined the streets, each one housing fascinating shops. Arthur was in awe as he looked around. There were stores for magic items, armories filled with weapons, shops selling rare spellbooks, and even stalls that dealt in beast cores. As they passed by a particular shop, Arthur became curious about the glowing orbs on display. Tabitha, who was walking with them, noticed his interest and explained that those orbs were called beast cores. They were magical cores taken from mana beasts and used to boost one's strength. But she warned that the results were unpredictable, making it a risky investment. Some beast cores could even carry a beast will within them, which made them extremely valuable. Arthur was stunned by the price. Tabitha added that while some cost hundreds of gold, the rare ones could go for thousands. Arthur thought to himself that he was already lucky to have a beast will of his own, thanks to Sylvie. That alone was enough for him. As they continued their walk through the bustling city streets, Tabitha shared more about the Helstia auction house. She explained that their auction house often received a wide variety of beast cores and sometimes even infant mana beasts. Arthur was welcome to take a closer look whenever he had the chance. Hearing that, Arthur sincerely expressed his gratitude. Not long after, Lilia suddenly turned to him, a hint of excitement in her eyes. She told him there was a place she had been planning to take him ever since they met. Arthur followed her, curious about the destination. To his surprise, she led him to a barber shop. Arthur hesitated, unsure if this was really necessary, but Alice, standing nearby, gently reminded him that his hair had grown wild and messy. The barber, noticing the situation, confidently promised to transform Arthur and make him look as polished as a gemstone. Inside, Arthur sat down reluctantly. Though he didn't say it out loud, he screamed inwardly as strands of his hair fell one after another. The sensation and the sudden change overwhelmed him. When the haircut was finally done, Arthur looked at his reflection. He felt a bit ridiculous at first, but Alice reassured him with a warm smile, calling him perfect. The change was striking. His new haircut made him look neat, sharp, and more grown up. He gleamed under the light, no longer the wild-haired boy he had been moments ago. Eleanor giggled, teasing him and saying that now he finally looked good enough to be her brother. Alice laughed along, adding that he finally looked like a proper young man. As they continued walking through the market, Arthur's attention was suddenly drawn to a group of children nearby. They stood confidently, wearing matching uniforms. Their posture and expression showed pride and superiority. Elia noticed Arthur's gaze and told him that those children were students from Xyrus Academy. She explained that wearing that uniform was seen as a symbol of high status in the city. Arthur responded with mild disapproval, sensing arrogance in their demeanor. Elia admitted that many of those students were indeed proud and difficult, but they were still treated almost like royalty in the city. When Alice asked what they were talking about, Elia replied casually that it was just a conversation about the school. While they were still speaking, Arthur quietly slipped away. He darted off in search of something far more thrilling, a weapon store. As Arthur disappeared into the distance, Elia looked around, surprised by how quickly he had run off. She called out, wondering where he had gone, and compared his excitement to that of a curious little puppy. Alice, watching her son from afar, smiled warmly. She shared how unusual it was to see Arthur act so thrilled and energetic. Normally, he was calm and mature beyond his years, but seeing this side of him felt refreshing. Tabitha also added her thoughts. She admitted that it was comforting to see Arthur behave more like a normal child, especially after the unbelievable events they had all witnessed the night before. Meanwhile, Arthur stepped into a nearby weapon shop. The moment he entered, his eyes lit up. He was completely mesmerized by the rows of weapons lining the walls. Swords, spears, and other deadly tools, all glinting under the warm lights of the shop. His gaze scanned every corner, absorbing the shapes, sizes, and craftsmanship. However, the shop's atmosphere quickly changed when one of the employees noticed him. The man looked down on Arthur, clearly judging him by his appearance. Speaking sternly, the man told Arthur that children weren't allowed in the shop and asked him to leave immediately. He tried to explain that the weapon Arthur was looking at wasn't a toy. It was dangerous. The man even suggested Arthur go to the nearby candy store instead. When the shopkeeper reached out to grab Arthur's shoulder, Arthur reacted instantly. Without hesitation, he smacked the man's hand away. His expression was calm, but his message was clear. Arthur knew very well what a weapon was and apologized, maintaining his composure as he turned to leave. But the situation escalated when the shopkeeper raised his voice, demanding to know what kind of house would raise such a disrespectful child. Just as things seemed tense, a new voice broke the tension. It was Alice. She stepped forward protectively, her eyes sharp, warning the man to take his hand off her son. The shopkeeper tried to defend himself, boasting about his name and status, claiming to be from a noble house. But the moment he looked up and recognized who he was speaking to, his confidence vanished. The name Helstia left his lips in shock. Realizing he had insulted someone connected to the powerful Helstia family, his face turned pale. Tabitha then stepped forward. Calm and composed, she reminded the man, whose name was Agastus, that he was from a branch of the Ravenport family. She asked if he would prefer to lose the privilege of participating in the Hellstay auction house. Overwhelmed with fear, the man dropped to his knees. He begged for forgiveness, admitting that he had no idea Arthur was associated with such an influential family. His tone changed completely, now filled with regret and panic. As they walked away from the shop, Arthur thanked Tabitha for stepping in, but she chuckled and admitted that she was more worried about what Arthur might have done to the man if the situation had gone on longer. While their conversation continued and their group made their way back, a hooded man watched from the shadows. He remained silent, his eyes not on the people, but on the small creature walking beside Arthur, Sylvie. The man studied her closely, observing every movement she made. Unaware of the silent gaze, the group returned to the Hellstay estate, unaware that someone had just taken an interest in them. As Arthur and his family stepped inside the home, they were warmly greeted by Vincent Hellstay. His face lit up the moment he saw them. With his usual enthusiasm, he called out to Arthur and eagerly gestured for him to come closer. He wanted to introduce someone important. Standing beside Vincent was a dignified woman, exuding authority and grace. Her name was Cynthia Goodsky. She was the founder and director of Xyrus Academy, an institution regarded as the pinnacle of magical education. Xyrus Academy wasn't just a school, it was a legendary sanctuary reserved for those few gifted enough to have both the talent and the background to enter. Generations of elite scholars, powerful mages, royal guards, renowned guild members, and military leaders had all passed through its halls. Its name carried such weight that even the most prominent academies elsewhere in the continent paled in comparison. And at the very helm of this colossal institution stood Director Cynthia Goodsky. With a calm smile, Cynthia extended her hand toward Arthur, greeting him formally. Arthur, though mature for his age, found himself momentarily unsure. He hesitated, unsure of the right etiquette for someone of her stature. His thoughts raced, whether to bow, kiss her hand, or simply shake it. He reached out politely, attempting a handshake and offering a respectful greeting. But before he could complete the gesture, Alice, his mother, moved swiftly. From behind, her hand gently but firmly pushed Arthur's head down into a respectful bow. She apologized for her son's lack of formal manners, explaining that he had only just returned and was unfamiliar with such customs. Cynthia, however, took no offense. Her tone was kind and understanding. She admitted that it was she who was being inconsiderate by visiting so late at night. Still, she emphasized that she couldn't turn down a favor from someone like Vincent, someone who had contributed greatly to the academy over the years. Vincent brushed off the compliment with a soft chuckle, expressing his hope that one day his daughter Lilia might attend Xyrus Academy herself. Lilia, standing nearby, heard those words clearly. Though silent, her eyes revealed the weight of her father's expectations. It was a moment that etched itself into her heart. Cynthia revealed her purpose for visiting, explaining that it was rare for her to personally visit a potential student's home, but Vincent had stirred her curiosity, insisting that a child prodigy of the highest caliber was currently living under his roof. With that, she requested to see a demonstration of Arthur's abilities and asked to be led to an open area. Tabitha quickly agreed and offered to guide them. Arthur, caught off guard and still hungry, hesitantly attempted to ask if he could eat first. Before he could finish, Alice gently grabbed him, silencing him before the words could leave his mouth completely. As the group made their way outside, Tabitha took the lead and addressed Cynthia with polite direction. Vincent followed with cheerful excitement, mentioning a paved courtyard that would be perfect for the demonstration. Arthur trailed behind, muttering under his breath to Sylvie that it looked like dinner would have to wait. Cynthia's eyes shifted to the creature perched on Arthur. Her interest deepened upon noticing Sylvie's unique presence. She initially assumed the mana beast was a contracted companion of Arthur's father, but Arthur corrected the assumption. Sylvie wasn't a contract beast. She was his bond, a creature that had hatched only a few months ago. That revelation drew even more curiosity from the director. Arthur briefly recounted how he had come upon Sylvie. Her mother, a scaled wolf-like beast with small wings, had been critically wounded while protecting her egg. Arthur had found them just in time. He considered it pure luck that he was able to take the egg and witness Sylvie's birth. The group continued walking toward the courtyard as the conversation shifted back to Arthur's abilities. Cynthia commented on Vincent's secrecy, noting that he had only mentioned Arthur was an augmenter but refused to say more, choosing instead to let her see the surprise for herself. Internally, Cynthia observed Arthur with a sharp eye. There was something about the boy, calm, steady, unaffected by pressure. She couldn't tell whether it was deep confidence or youthful arrogance that made him seem so composed in front of someone like her. Meanwhile, Vincent, unable to contain his excitement, whispered to himself about the spectacle that was about to unfold. He was sure Cynthia would be amazed when Arthur demonstrated his control over fire and lightning. This time, Vincent was confident that nothing would be accidentally set ablaze. Unlike the last courtyard Arthur had unknowingly scorched, Cynthia observed Arthur closely. She asked whether he wished to arm himself with a weapon before before the duel began, but Arthur, confident in his abilities and noting that she had no intention of using the wand at her waist, chose to fight barehanded. Cynthia responded with a calm smile and agreed to begin. Arthur centered himself and prepared mentally. The early days of training under Virion came back to him. The intense drills, the discipline, and the transformation of his key arts into real elemental magic. Fire had come first, explosive, raw, and powerful. Then water followed, fluid, reactive, and sharp in defense. With time, he had also adapted the martial arts of earth and wind from his previous life, merging them into this world's mana system. Now, all of it was part of him. He took a deep breath and focused. Then he stomped his foot down. A crack ran through the solid ground beneath him. In his mind, he recalled the principles he had read and trained under. Align the body, focus the intent, and only then invoke the spell. Mana wasn't just inside the body, it surrounded everything. Internal mana had to blend seamlessly with ambient mana, and only with proper control could it be shaped into elemental form. Arthur stomped again, harder this time. A sharp explosion of power burst from beneath his feet as large stones lifted into the air. The sheer force stunned the onlookers. The raw energy radiating from such a young boy was something they couldn't believe. For a conjurer, the process would be completely different. But Arthur was an augmenter. He didn't rely solely on chanting or symbols. Instead, he used his body as the medium and weapon. With his background and past life knowledge, this advantage made him dangerous. Standing still, he casually kicked one of the stones toward Cynthia. Without even blinking, a wall of wind formed in front of her. The rock was hurled into the sky, scattered by the sudden gust. Arthur whistled under his breath, impressed by her reflexes. Her casting was fast. Too fast for even most high-ranking mages. Arthur then used wind magic beneath his feet, sending himself airborne. He leapt nearly 10 feet into the air as a vortex of wind surrounded his right fist. Timing it perfectly, he launched off the falling boulder that Cynthia had just deflected, adding more speed to his approach. He threw a punch wrapped in swirling wind straight toward her barrier. Their spells clashed mid-air. The impact generated a violent gust of wind that blasted outward. Arthur was pushed back by the recoil, landing a few meters away, while Cynthia remained unmoved, her posture still composed and firm. Despite all the time Arthur had trained with Virion, he realized again how demanding it was to wield earth and wind simultaneously. Fire and water had become easier with practice, but this combination still required precise control. He had to focus harder. Without delay, Arthur charged again. Cynthia, anticipating his movement, flicked her wrist. A small vortex formed instantly in front of her, growing rapidly into a miniature tornado. Stones and shards of debris were swept up, spinning in his direction. Arthur crossed his arms to shield himself as the swirling attack closed in. Around them, the others instinctively raised their arms to shield their faces from the flying debris. Arthur was thrown back from the previous clash, his body skidding against the stone floor before he managed to halt himself with his hands. Cynthia was already chanting, her tone calm and melodic as she invoked the next spell. A surge of wind responded immediately. 4 tall twisters, each as wide and tall as a young tree, spiraled into existence around her. Before Arthur could even prepare fully, the twisters launched toward him, roaring across the courtyard. Arthur's eyes narrowed. He quickly gathered wind-attributed mana and began forming a small cyclone around himself. The wind he summoned wrapped tightly around him, lifting his cloak and hair with its force. Then he began to spin with the cyclone, allowing the motion to guide him. Using the same momentum, sharp blades of wind formed along both his hands like extensions of his will. The collision was intense. His cyclone met the 4 twisters head-on, creating a burst of energy and pressure that formed a small crater beneath their feet. The clash scattered dust and stones in every direction, but when it cleared, Arthur stood at the center, unharmed. His spell had neutralized the assault. Cynthia watched in silence, impressed, but not finished. This was to be the final test. She wanted to see how far he could go, not just in strength, but endurance. With the tip of her fingers glowing faintly, she released her last spell. A powerful wave of mana pulsed forward. Arthur didn't even see it fully before it hit him. The impact was crushing. A high-pitched ring filled his ears. The world spun around him. His legs gave way and he dropped to one knee, struggling to stay conscious. The spell hadn't been elemental. It was sound-based. Cynthia was a deviant, a rare kind of mage who mastered an advanced path of elemental manipulation. She observed him, visibly impressed. His performance was far beyond expectations. His control, reflexes, and ability to combine physical combat with advanced magic were rare. Even among adults, few had displayed such a level of magical understanding at such a young age. Reynolds rushed forward to his son, eyes wide wide with disbelief. He questioned how Arthur had learned to use earth and wind magic so suddenly. Cynthia turned, confused by Reynolds' phrasing. Vincent quickly added that just the previous day, Arthur had demonstrated both fire and lightning magic, and even admitted to burning the lawn, which was why the courtyard had been chosen for the duel. Cynthia's expression slowly changed as she pieced together the truth. She asked for confirmation, realizing that this child, so young, was capable of controlling not just multiple elements, but also one at the deviant level. Arthur calmly clarified the truth. It wasn't 3 elements, it was 4. He had elemental affinity with fire, water, earth, and wind. That moment shook Cynthia. She staggered back, caught off guard by the revelation. Reynolds quickly stepped forward and caught her before she lost her balance. She steadied herself and assured him she was fine, but her shock was clear. Such a thing was unheard of, even among the most gifted of mages. Meanwhile, little Ellie clutched Alice's sleeve, asking softly whether her brother was strong. Alice remained quiet, her thoughts overwhelmed, but Cynthia spoke gently. She told the girl that Arthur was indeed strong, perhaps the strongest in the future. The courtyard eventually calmed. Arthur turned to his family and apologized. Not for the duel, not for the overwhelming magic, but for keeping all of this hidden from them for so long. There was so much he had wanted to say, so much he wished he could explain, but even now, with everything laid bare, there were still truths he wasn't ready to reveal. Director Cynthia observed Arthur with sharp, discerning eyes. Something about him told her this display of power was not the full picture. At that moment, she conjured a soundproof barrier around them, enclosing their conversation in a bubble of silence. No one outside the sphere would be able to hear what was said within. She invited Arthur to speak freely. Arthur sensed immediately that she had seen through him. He told her he wasn't simply displaying his talents for recognition. He had done it because she possessed 2 things he desperately needed: power and influence. He asked her to use that power to protect his family, to keep them safe until he was strong enough to do it himself. In return, he promised not only to attend her academy, but also to consider her his benefactor. Cynthia was taken aback by the boldness of the request. Even the monarchs of the kingdom wouldn't make such a one-sided deal with her, and here was a young boy speaking to her like an equal. Yet Arthur remained calm, confident. He explained that perhaps, unlike even the king and queen, he understood his own potential, and trusted that Cynthia did too. He reminded her that his end of the deal would have to wait. There was still time before he would officially enroll. Cynthia questioned what he meant. Arthur then shared something more personal, something he hadn't even told his family. He had made a promise to someone important in his life, a promise to live fully and experience the world for what it had to offer, and he believed entering the academy at a more typical age would help fulfill that. Cynthia was surprised. That would mean a wait of over 3 years. She asked what he planned to do until then. Arthur responded with quiet determination. He had made a decision. Before enrolling, before settling into the life of a student, he would become an adventurer. Alice's voice cracked through the room, loud and trembling with emotion. She stood firm, eyes wide in panic as she tried to hold back her tears. The idea of her son becoming an adventurer was too much. Arthur had just returned, after years of separation and the haunting belief that he might have died. And now he was talking about leaving again, throwing himself into danger all over. Alice's voice grew louder as she yelled, unable to contain the storm of fear and frustration within her. She was devastated, clenching her fists as her youngest child, Eleanor, clung to her leg with wide eyes, confused and scared. Reynolds stepped forward, calm but conflicted. He didn't immediately reject Arthur's plan. Instead, he urged Alice to listen, to hear what Arthur had to say, but Alice's pain overflowed. She turned on her husband, enraged, her voice trembling with betrayal. She reminded him of everything they had endured just to bring Arthur back into their lives. Tears finally fell down Alice's cheeks. Her body trembled and her voice cracked as she asked her husband how he could even consider this. Arthur slowly approached his mother. His expression was gentle and he reached out, placing his hand over hers. His voice was steady, but his eyes revealed the deep care he held for her. He assured her that he wasn't leaving right away. In fact, he was looking forward to spending several months at home, reconnecting with his family. But after spending over 3 years in the Elven Kingdom, he couldn't help but feel like a stranger to the rest of the continent. He wanted to see it with his own eyes and to understand the world as his parents once had during their own adventuring days. Reynolds nodded, recalling his own youth, the pull of freedom and the thrill of the unknown. He admitted he could relate. That same fire had burned in him when he first awakened as a teenager. Still, he reminded Arthur that being an adventurer came with grave risks. No matter how strong or prepared he believed he was, the path ahead was unpredictable and often cruel. In the middle of their tense intense discussion, a new thought came to Arthur, a compromise. He offered the idea of traveling with a guard or supervisor, someone to accompany him, to offer both guidance and protection. Alice hesitated, the pain in her eyes softening only slightly, but the fear still gripped her. Reynolds, however, lit up at the idea. He said it could work, though they'd have to find the right person, someone trustworthy and capable. Before he could go any further, Alice turned on him with fiery eyes. She grabbed him by the collar, her voice rising in a mix of rage and heartbreak. She couldn't believe he was even entertaining the idea. She declared without room for argument that she would not allow it. She would not let her son vanish again for another 3 years. Moments after the argument, the tension in the house began to fade. Emotion slowly settled, and the storm of shouting gave way to quieter breathing and hesitant glances. Arthur, seeing the pain his words had caused, quickly clarified his intentions. He reassured them he wasn't going away for 3 years straight. Instead, he planned to return every few months, maybe even more often, between missions. He wanted to make it clear that he wasn't abandoning his family again. Alice, still emotionally shaken but trying to hold herself together, managed a weak smile. She asked him if he truly meant that. Arthur nodded with confidence, showing that he was serious and sincere. Then, Eleanor, his little sister, looked up at him with sad, wide eyes. Her expression was full of heartbreak as she asked if he was leaving. The sight of her looking so crushed made Arthur panic inside. He immediately knelt down and reassured her, telling her he wasn't leaving yet, and that he would be staying home for a long time. Alice, while still not completely convinced, softened. She said she hadn't given her full consent yet, but she needed to understand something. She asked Arthur why he wanted to become an adventurer right now. She questioned if it would make more sense for him to first attend school before heading into a life of danger. Arthur answered her calmly. He explained that if he joined a school right now, he would be much younger than the other students, and while he wanted to fit in and make friends, the large age gap would make it difficult. He wanted a more normal experience when the time came. Alice, still trying to find alternatives, suggested that maybe Arthur could help out his father in the meantime instead of rushing into the adventurer's path. Her voice was hopeful but unsure. Before she could say more, Reynolds stepped in and ended the discussion with quiet confidence. He said that their son would be fine. Arthur looked at his father with gratitude and gave him a smile. He appreciated the trust and support. Still, deep inside, Arthur knew it wasn't just about training. He didn't only want to grow stronger. He wanted to experience real battles, real situations where he could apply the skills he had learned since arriving in this world. He needed to challenge himself in open environments where the risks were real, but he wasn't lying to his mother either. Sylvia had told him to enjoy life, to live it fully, and Arthur planned to do just that. The next morning, the mood was lighter. It was a rest day, and Reynolds had the day off from work. The Leywin and Hellstaff families sat together, sharing breakfast around a warm table. Everyone was chatting, smiling, and enjoying a rare moment of peace. Alice scolded Reynolds gently, reminding him to slow down and chew properly. Reynolds only grinned, enjoying the rare luxury of a slow, unrushed meal. Vincent raised an eyebrow, casually reminding Reynolds about his visit to the auction house later that day to guide the new recruits. Reynolds chuckled in response, admitting it was just a convenient excuse. The real plan was to throw a small welcoming party afterward. Vincent immediately pointed out the real reason behind the strange spike in meal expenses, half joking and half accusing. Lilia, sitting beside him, covered her face in embarrassment. Arthur, trying to shift the focus, asked the group what their plans for the day were. Tabitha explained that she and Alice had errands to run around town in preparation for an upcoming event at the Helsty auction house. They were taking Eleanor and Lilia along with them and extended the invitation to Arthur as well. Arthur politely declined, preferring to stay back for the day. Changing the subject, Vincent turned to Alice and Reynolds, asking if they had come to a decision regarding Arthur's desire to become an adventurer. Alice responded that they had agreed, but only under certain conditions. Tabitha, curious, asked what those conditions were. Reynolds listed them clearly. First, Arthur would wait until after his birthday in 3 months. Second, he would have a guard with him during missions. Third, he must return home at least once every 2 months. Other than that, Reynolds felt Arthur was intelligent and capable enough to manage things on his own. Vincent raised a valid concern. While the conditions seemed reasonable, the problem was finding a guard strong enough to actually protect someone like Arthur. In fact, it almost seemed like Arthur would end up being the one protecting the guard. The thought of an 8-year-old shielding a seasoned adventurer brought unexpected laughter around the table. Suddenly, Reynolds jumped up with a flash of inspiration. He remembered receiving a letter from the Adventurers Guild. The Twin Horns party would be returning from a dungeon expedition soon, within 2 months. He suggested that one of them could be assigned to accompany Arthur as his guard. Alice, surprised by the proposal, actually agreed that it was a good idea. Reynolds teased her reaction, pretending to be shocked that she liked one of his suggestions. Arthur, meanwhile, was silently thrilled. The idea of meeting the Twin Horns again filled him with anticipation and excitement. Later that day, Lilia went shopping with her mother Tabitha Tabitha, along with Alice and little Eleanor. The women moved through the town as they looked for suitable items for the upcoming 10-year anniversary event at the auction house. Alice was unsure if her simple crafts would be appropriate for such a formal gathering, but Tabitha reassured her. In fact, she revealed that many noblewomen had fallen in love with Alice's centerpiece decorations. Alice was surprised and a bit embarrassed. She didn't understand how anyone had even seen her homemade pieces. With a sly wink, Tabitha confessed that she had secretly taken a few from their house and used them to decorate the private viewing rooms at the auction house. Alice couldn't help but laugh at the mischief, blushing as she realized those cheap little ornaments were now a hit among high-ranking guests. Ellie looked visibly disappointed that her older brother Arthur had chosen not to join them on the outing. Her small face was full of pouty frustration. Lilia, noticing this, tried to tease her, asking if she was upset. Ellie didn't hide her feelings. She missed Arthur and had wanted him to come shopping with them. Lilia, playfully dramatic, began pretending to be heartbroken. She suggested that maybe now that Arthur was around, Ellie no longer cared about her. Ellie panicked, insisting that both Lilia and Arthur were special in their own ways. Lilia was Lilia, and Arthur was her big brother. Just as Lilia continued with her mock complaints, a loud thud broke the moment. Tabitha had smacked her daughter lightly on the head, scolding her for giving Ellie such a hard time. Lilia whined, clutching her head and defending herself, saying she was only teasing because Ellie wouldn't stop thinking about Arthur. Tabitha raised an eyebrow and hinted that maybe Lilia herself was thinking about Arthur a bit too much. Her playful accusation caught Lilia completely off guard, and the girl blushed fiercely. She quickly denied it, calling Arthur a big weirdo, but her tone softened as she admitted her real feelings. Lilia looked down and confessed that she found it unfair. While she was still waiting patiently to awaken, Arthur had already become a powerful mage, one stronger than many adults. Her frustration turned emotional, and tears welled up in her eyes. She wanted to become a mage too, not for glory, but to make her parents proud. Alice, watching the scene, gently stepped in. She reassured Lilia that she shouldn't compare herself to Arthur. She reminded her that among kids her age, it was Arthur who was the exception, not the standard. Lilia wiped her tears and asked more seriously if either Alice or Reynolds had trained Arthur. She wanted to know if they had helped him grow so strong, and if so, could they help her too? Alice explained that aside from a bit of sword training from Reynolds, they hadn't done anything. Arthur had grown on his own. Tabitha looked shocked. She acknowledged that Arthur was clearly gifted, but still found it hard to believe they had no hand in his development. She quickly apologized for probing, realizing she was treading on sensitive ground. Alice, however, didn't mind. She appreciated how much they all cared. She admitted something quietly, that both she and Reynolds were aware Arthur was hiding things from them. There were things he never explained, like his advanced swordsmanship before the bandit attack, or how he grew so powerful while he was away. Tabitha urged her to ask, saying the curiosity must be eating at both parents. But Alice only smiled. She believed Arthur had his reasons for staying silent, and that trusting him meant giving him space. For her, that trust, waiting and supporting him until he was ready to open up, was what it truly meant to be a parent. From a distance, hidden in the shadows of a narrow alley, a hooded man kept his eyes fixed on the group. His face was covered, and the area around him was silent. He had been watching them for some time now, waiting for an opening. Turning slightly, the hooded man quietly spoke to another individual beside him. He reported that the Mana Beast wasn't with the group today. A mage from Xyrus Academy had been assigned as their guard, making it difficult for him to follow closely. Still, he had gathered enough information to confirm that the boy, likely the master of the Mana Beast, would be attending the 10-year anniversary event at the Hellstay auction house. With that, he snapped his fingers and stated his next move. The best opportunity would present itself at the event, and he intended to inform Lord Sebastian immediately. Elsewhere, inside the Hellstay estate, Vincent was deep in his work. His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden knock on the door. Curious and slightly annoyed by the disturbance, he opened the door only to find Arthur standing outside. He greeted the boy, casually mentioning that Reynolds, Arthur's father, had just left for the auction house. Arthur, however, had come for Vincent specifically. He requested a private conversation, and Vincent, though surprised, invited him in. As the two sat down and shared a cup of tea, Vincent couldn't help but feel uneasy. Something about Arthur's presence was overwhelming. Despite being only 8 years old, the boy carried himself with such seriousness and power that Vincent felt more nervous than he had ever been, even when meeting the King of Sapin. The Arthur before him now was completely different from the cheerful boy seen around his family. This seemed to be Arthur's true nature. Arthur calmly expressed his gratitude for the tea before getting to the reason for his visit. He asked Vincent to help him acquire a few specific items: a protective cloak with a hood, a well-crafted sword suited to his size, and a mask capable of altering his voice. Vincent hesitated for a moment. The cloak wouldn't be an issue, but the mask was another matter entirely. Only an artificer with deviant sound magic could make such a device properly. Vincent admitted he could try, though he doubted the quality. Internally, Vincent questioned himself. He was was already overwhelmed with preparations for the upcoming anniversary event, yet he found himself eager to fulfill this boy's request. What was it about Arthur that made even adults like him move without second thought? Arthur offered his thanks and mentioned that while he didn't have money, he had thought of a way to repay Vincent, but Vincent waved it off almost immediately. He insisted it wasn't necessary. Reynolds had already been a tremendous help since joining him. Thanks to Reynolds' training, the security team at the auction house had become stronger, and incidents of theft and violence had dropped to their lowest in years. Arthur explained that one of the reasons he had visited today was to discuss something deeply important to him, something beyond cloaks, swords, or masks. He had recently discovered a method that might help Ellie awaken her mana core faster, and he was determined to help her. But that wasn't all. If this method worked for Ellie, he believed he could use it to help Lilia as well. Vincent's eyes widened in disbelief. Arthur's confidence caught him off guard. Arthur knew that neither Vincent nor Tabitha were mages, but he didn't let that fact stop him. He was sure he could help their daughter awaken as a mage, possibly even earn a place in Xyrus Academy. Arthur's words weren't empty. He believed in what he said, and his determination was clear. Later, alone with his thoughts, Arthur sat down and tried to concentrate on his mana core, but his body betrayed him. He sneezed suddenly and uncontrollably. The distractions, both mental and physical, were testing his patience. Training wasn't progressing fast enough. His desire to regain the strength he once had in his past life was burning fiercely inside him, yet that progress felt slow and uncertain. The fight with Director Cynthia had been a sharp reminder. He was still lacking. His skills were not yet refined. He wasn't used to fighting the way mages did in this world, and the difference had finally struck him deeply. His thoughts drifted to a different life, a different time. He remembered the night soaked in fog and pain. In his past life, the head caretaker of the orphanage, a woman who had been the closest thing he ever had to a mother, was gunned down. Her name had been Headmaster Wilbeck. She had found him wandering the streets and offered him a simple steamed bun. That moment became the turning point of his old life. She had taken care of him, taught him to read, taught him how to behave, and treated him with genuine kindness. And then she was gone, killed, murdered by agents from a foreign country. That loss had shaped his path. He had become king not out of ambition, but out of a need to avenge her death. And he succeeded. But in that pursuit of revenge, he had lost everything else. Those few precious people who had still mattered to him were caught in the fire, leaving him a powerful king, yet utterly alone in a cold and empty world. Now, reborn into a second life, Arthur made himself a promise. This time, he wouldn't seek strength for revenge. He would grow stronger to protect, for Ellie, for his parents, and for those he now loved. His body dripped with sweat as Sylvie's small voice echoed in his head, alerting him that the others had returned. Arthur took a deep breath and left his room, heading down the stairs. The moment he reached the bottom, he was met by Alice, his mother, who looked clearly agitated. Her expression was a mix of concern and disbelief. Right behind her was Tabitha, and she too seemed upset. Alice had heard about Arthur's plan to help Lilia awaken as a mage. Even if spoken in jest, she found it insensitive, knowing Lilia's family lacked magical lineage. Tabitha felt the same. To her, suggesting something like this, especially if it turned out to be a joke, was going too far. But Arthur calmly clarified that he wasn't joking. He had made a proper offer to Vincent, and the man had accepted it after consideration. Vincent stepped in to confirm this, his voice full of enthusiasm, and quickly urged everyone to move to the living room for the demonstration. Once there, Arthur faced two confused girls, Ellie and Lilia. He gently asked them to sit on the floor near the fireplace, back to back. He wanted them to be comfortable, leaving just enough space between them so that he could sit in the middle. Arthur lowered himself between them, sitting cross-legged. His expression was calm, focused, and patient. He instructed them to breathe a specific way. Arthur understood that mana was most easily sensed when breathing followed a controlled, slow, and rhythmic pattern. This method wasn't just random, it was carefully thought out based on his experience. He hoped the girls could follow the technique. He guided them through the process. The breathing began with a deep inhale through the nose, filling their lungs completely. Then, just when it felt like no more air could be taken in, they were told to open their mouths and take one more breath. After that, they had to exhale in short bursts, 15 times. He told them to repeat this, eyes closed, until they began to see light-like specks in the darkness behind their eyelids. It would be the sign that their mana perception was beginning to awaken. Lilia struggled a little, unsure if she was doing it right. Arthur stayed calm. He had already expected this, especially since neither of the girls' parents were mages. Their bodies weren't naturally trained to sense mana, but he believed this method could help them bypass that limitation. Alice stepped in with concern, gently asking for clarity. She wanted to know exactly what Arthur was trying to do. Tabitha voiced her own doubts, acknowledging Arthur's magical talent, but pointing out how unusual and risky it was to try forcing a child's awakening. Such things usually happened on their own, naturally over time. Arthur listened to their concerns without hesitation. Then he explained his reasoning. He wasn't just doing this recklessly. He had awakened on his own at the age of 3. The reason he believed he could guide others was because of his rare affinity with all elements. This multi-elemental affinity allowed him to understand the process deeply and from different angles. He had already gone over the theory in his mind countless times, but this was no longer theory. Now it was time to test it and let the results speak for themselves. He asked everyone to simply watch. Arthur prepared himself silently, letting his thoughts settle. In his mind, he focused. This was the moment to test whether everything he had theorized would work. The breathing technique was only part of it. What came next was crucial. Then, with purpose, Arthur reached out and placed one hand on each of their backs. He began channeling his mana, his rare quadra-elemental mana, into them. It was a gentle but steady flow, not meant to overwhelm but to awaken. The moment his mana entered their bodies, both Ellie and Lilia gasped slightly in surprise. Their senses were reacting. It was working. Within seconds, Lilia's voice rang out, full of wonder. She could see the floating lights. Ellie echoed the excitement, amazed by the number of glowing specks appearing in her vision. To them, it was beautiful, almost like magic. But to Arthur, it was proof that his method was working. Arthur guided them further. He told them to focus on the lights. These specks were their mana, and the goal was to gather them together, like friends forming a group. It wasn't just instruction, it was a way to help them feel emotionally connected to the energy within them. Both girls responded with determination, and so, Arthur remained there, seated between them with his hands on their backs, continuing to pour his mana into their bodies. Time passed slowly. An hour went by as he carefully triggered the dormant mana hidden deep within them. He didn't rush it. He knew how delicate this moment was. Finally, exhausted, Arthur pulled his hands back. Sweat lined his forehead, and his body felt drained. He had given it all for the day. It was enough. Vincent, filled with anticipation, asked Arthur if Lilia would be able to become a mage. Arthur explained patiently that while it would take a few years, with consistent help in the beginning, she would surely get there. Before he could even finish his sentence, Tabitha rushed forward and hugged him tightly. Tears ran down Tabitha's face as she expressed her overwhelming gratitude. For someone who had grown up without magic, seeing her daughter receive the opportunity to become a mage was more than just a gift. It was a dream she never thought possible, and now it was happening because of Arthur. From that day on, Arthur's life settled into a peaceful rhythm. Every morning he trained alone to push his limits. After that, he dedicated time to helping Ellie and Lilia continue their journey toward awakening. Even though the desire to grow stronger burned inside him, he never let it consume all his time. He chose to be present with those around him. Deep down, he knew this peaceful life wouldn't last forever, so he cherished every moment while it lasted. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Until next time, happy watching.